A few months ago, I was scrolling through a popular Japanese online forum, a place often buzzing with raw, unfiltered public sentiment. In one thread, user after user was expressing a deep, simmering anger about a specific policy. The language was visceral, charged with a sense of betrayal and a demand for immediate, forceful action. The consensus was overwhelming. This is what the people want. What struck me, however, was a single buried comment from a user who claimed to work in digital marketing. They weren't arguing about the policy itself. Instead, they coldly pointed out the identical phrasing used in 3 separate, highly upvoted rants posted within minutes of each other. They linked to a now-deleted account that specialized in engagement farming and noted the sudden, coordinated spike in traffic from a cluster of unfamiliar IP addresses that coincided perfectly with the thread's explosion onto the forum's front page. The angry will of the people, presented as a spontaneous eruption of grassroots fury, looked, in that one sliver of exposed data, less like a natural phenomenon and more like a precisely timed injection. The genuine commenters, the real people feeling real frustration, were there too, of course, but they were now swimming in a current that had been deliberately warmed and directed. Their authentic anger was the fuel, but someone else was steering the engine. That moment was a quiet glimpse behind the curtain of modern political theater, where the most potent illusion isn't what people are made to believe, but the very idea that they came to believe it all on their own. Okay, so let's unpack this. That moment, that quiet glimpse behind the curtain, it really shows us something profound. In modern politics, the will of the people isn't just something you listen to anymore. It can be precisely manufactured, injected, and steered.
It can. And it reveals that the loudest voices aren't always the most numerous. Often they're just the most organized and, crucially, the most technologically amplified.
Which begs the real question, right? Who is doing the amplifying? And maybe more importantly, what are they steering us toward?
Well, that observation is profoundly critical because it shows we've moved beyond just, simple misinformation or fake news. We're in a realm now where the very structure of public discourse is being engineered.
Engineered, that's a strong word.
It is, but it's accurate. We're not looking at spontaneous political sentiment. We're examining a sophisticated, multi-layered strategy that blends this kind of online manipulation with hardline conservative governance. The goal isn't to win hearts through reasoned debate. That's slow. It's unpredictable.
It's messy.
It's very messy. The goal is to win territory by creating an overwhelming wall of controlled noise.
So the mission for this deep dive is to investigate that exact blend. The strategic rise of these Japanese populist movements, the really sophisticated computational tactics used by administrations like Abe's and now Takaichi's, and what all of this means for the integrity of Japan's democratic institutions.
And we'll see how this shift moves the entire political system away from, let's say, nuanced debate toward these sharp, binary, you're with us or against us divisions.
And we'll also explore why that erosion of what you might call domestic liberal substance has these really profound international consequences.
To really get a handle on the mechanism we're discussing, we need a clear definition of what we mean by computational propaganda, or CP.
Right, it's a term that gets thrown around a lot.
It does. But specifically, it refers to orchestrated attempts to manipulate public opinion or, the outcome of elections. It's done primarily using social media, and often it utilizes these networks of bots, sock puppet accounts, and human trolls.
And all of that is to create the illusion of widespread support or opposition for something.
Exactly. An illusion where none might truly exist, or at the very least, to amplify some genuine sentiment completely out of proportion.
And the scale of this in Japan, especially on a platform like Twitter, seems like a perfect storm. Anonymity is much more culturally embraced there, which must create an ideal environment for this kind of coordinated action.
It's a perfect environment. We have evidence of this going back over a decade. Some of the initial research during the 2014 general election gave us the first real concrete warning signs that something was highly irregular in the digital sphere.
What did they find?
It was a key piece of foundational data. Researchers were analyzing election-related Japanese tweets during that period, and they found a truly staggering and, frankly, highly suspicious trend. Of the entire body of election-related tweets they collected, a full 80% were identified as duplicates or near duplicates of a very small number of original posts.
80%. That's not organic. That can't be.
It's not remotely organic. To give you some perspective, they compared that ratio to a German language dataset collected at the same time. The Japanese volume of just copied content was astronomically high. It immediately suggested highly automated, or at the very least, highly coordinated activity, not people just sharing their thoughts.
So the core mechanism at play here, it isn't trying to sway you with facts or logic. It's what you were calling the strategy of noise.
Yeah.
How does that actually work? I mean, how do you make 80% duplication an effective tool?
Well, the objective isn't logical engagement. You're not trying to persuade someone in the middle. That takes time and complexity. The goal is to manipulate the perception of public opinion.
Right, the illusion of consensus.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You do it by artificially generating trending topics, either through massive coordinated retweeting campaigns, or, as we saw in that data, by posting hundreds or thousands of slightly altered versions of the same core message. Researchers have a great name for this.
Which is?
Censorship through noise. Censorship through noise. That's a powerful phrase. It's not about deleting speech, it's about making it impossible to hear.
Yes. If you just make enough noise, the signal of legitimate, nuanced debate simply disappears under the sheer volume of your controlled messaging.
So if you're a journalist or even just a concerned citizen trying to figure out what the actual public mood is, you look at what's trending and you conclude, wow, everyone must really hate this policy.
When in reality, that trending topic was driven by a coordinated minority using very sophisticated tools. This technique effectively overwhelms the entire information ecosystem. It artificially steers the conversation before it can even begin naturally.
And it makes it almost impossible to tell the difference between authentic public concern and strategically amplified messaging.
And the analysis suggests that the Liberal Democratic Party, the LDP, has become a major beneficiary of this digital landscape. While CP is a global threat, there is mounting circumstantial evidence that certain factions within the LDP are actively using, or at least condoning and benefiting from, these activities. Often through what look like external groups, right? Like online support clubs or outside contractors.
Exactly. It creates a layer of plausible deniability.
And this level of operational sophistication, it didn't just pop up overnight. The LDP was, from what I understand, strategically way ahead of the curve. They recognized this digital shift really early.
They did. They developed a dedicated online campaign strategy as early as 2009. And what's crucial to remember is that this was 4 years before the 2013 revision of the Public Offices Election Law, which was the law that formally lifted the ban on online campaigning during election periods.
They were building their digital trenches while their opponents were, still using paper flyers?
That's a good way to put it. They were preparing for a war that others didn't even see coming.
And part of that early infrastructure was something they called the Truth Team, or T2.
Right. And publicly, it was framed as a measure to monitor, illicit online activities and defamation against LDP candidates, to clarify misleading posts. But it pretty quickly became a significant political asset in this new digital arena.
And you can see how important the institution was just by looking at its leadership. The head of T2, Kowai Katsuyuki, was later appointed the Minister for Digital Transformation. He was put in charge of the entire country's IT policy.
That trajectory tells you everything you need to know. Going from running a political cybersecurity and PR task force straight into the highest levels of digital governance, it just highlights how vital the digital sphere had become to the party leadership.
And how early they committed to owning that space.
Parallel to the T2 was the development of something called the Jemintu Net Supporters Club, or JNSC. The LDP officially endorsed this group back in 2012.
And what's remarkable about this club is how low the barrier to entry is.
Incredibly low. You just need to be 18 and hold a Japanese passport. Formal LDP membership isn't even required.
So that structure allows the party to tap into this huge, decentralized but mobilized base of digital activists who aren't, officially on the books as party members.
That's the strategic genius of it. And when you look at what these members are doing,
yeah.
Well, investigative journalist reports describe the JNSC not as some traditional passive support group.
No, the term they used was a working brigade.
The Working Brigade for Computational Propaganda centered heavily on negative campaigns against the opposition.
And the mechanism for mobilization is really straightforward, but it seems incredibly effective.
It is. The party provides members with talking points and targets through these member-only message boards. They'll post updates like, Diet member XY of the Constitutional Democratic Party is saying this or that, and then explicitly instruct members to, and this is a quote, lavish the respective Diet member with anonymous criticism.
Lavish with criticism. It's a direct instruction for a coordinated digital attack.
It is. It's organized, top-down direction of what appears to be grassroots anger.
This sounds a lot like a formal political channeling of that neto uyo energy we hear so much about. Is there any evidence of an overlap between this official LDP support group and that grassroots internet right-wing movement?
There's substantial circumstantial evidence, yes. Investigative reports suggest a really sizable overlap between JNSC membership and the pro-Abe faction of the Neto Uyo.
So you're talking about individuals whose online profiles often display these radical right-wing attitudes, symbols like the rising sun flag, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And that overlap means the LDP's infrastructure is actively feeding and directing a potent, highly motivated ideological base that's already predisposed to this kind of aggressive political campaigning and identity politics.
And the level of institutional tolerance for this kind of aggressive digital behavior is particularly revealing, isn't it? It says a lot about the political culture that was developing.
It really does. There was a report on a 2017 JNSC General Assembly where a supporter stood up and openly asked about using abusive puns and collages to attack opponents.
What kind of things are we talking about here?
Things like depicting an opposition leader with a soldier or a female candidate with a comfort woman. Really inflammatory, targeted harassment.
And what was the official response from the LDP representative?
That's the crucial part. Instead of issuing a clear prohibition saying, we don't condone hate speech or defamation, the responses were very non-committal. They suggested such actions should be left to personal judgment.
Personal judgment.
And in the atmosphere of that meeting, the attendees seemed to take those lighthearted statements as, and I'm quoting the report again, strategic advice rather than a prohibition.
So it effectively widens the Overton window. It legitimizes online harassment as a strategic tool of politics.
It does. And moving beyond just the human organization, the rules of the platforms themselves seem to favor this political strategy. We have to talk about algorithmic bias.
Right, the code itself. Research reveals a pretty significant overrepresentation of conservative and far-right content on Japanese social media. What does the data tell us about the real-world effect of that bias?
The data is stark. In the algorithmically prioritized home timeline on a platform like Twitter, the LDP enjoys double the reach of opposition parties, like the Constitutional Democratic Party, the CDP.
Double the reach. So this isn't a neutral town square. It's a playing field tilted in one direction.
It's a clear institutional advantage that's baked right into the system.
So you're saying this algorithmic bias is essentially baked in because the LDP adapted to the platform faster, they understood the rules of engagement better than their opponents, flooded the zone early, and the platform basically learned to reward that kind of content.
Precisely. It creates a self-reinforcing echo chamber. When these self-learning algorithms are trained on data that's already skewed toward one viewpoint, because that viewpoint is generating higher volume and higher engagement, the algorithm adopts and then further amplifies that bias,
creating a persistent advantage that rewards, fervor and activity over nuance and complexity.
Yes, and part of that advantage is the exploitation of what we could call the emotion engine.
The emotion engine.
Sentiment analysis shows that conservative tweets utilize emotional words significantly more frequently than liberal ones.
And which emotions are we talking about specifically?
We see a very frequent use of words related to dislike, joy, and crucially, anger.
And the algorithm loves anger.
The algorithm loves engagement. And anger drives engagement like nothing else. Since these filter algorithms are designed to prioritize anything that keeps users on the platform, and emotional expressions naturally drive higher interaction rates, this fervent, emotionally charged content is inherently more successful.
Its political effectiveness is tied directly to the intensity of the emotion, not the depth of the argument.
Exactly. And if you can't generate that fervor organically, well, you hire it. We also see the technique of using professional or semi-professional trolls to spread derogatory humor and defamatory verbal attacks.
And this isn't just random online hate speech. This is strategic.
Oh, it's absolutely strategic. There was research that specifically analyzed hate speech directed against female politicians from opposition parties.
And what did it find?
The findings showed that negative tweets frequently contained really abusive language based on gender and sexuality, often intersecting with nativist slurs. This constant directed stream of abuse changes the boundaries of acceptable public discourse. It erodes the norm of respectful debate.
And it pushes legitimate political figures, especially women, out of the public sphere.
It does. The sheer concentration of this abuse suggests a calculated effort directed not just against the individuals, but against the political bodies they represent.
So this abstract concept of computational propaganda, it really comes into sharp focus when legal cases pull back the curtain and expose the organizational structure behind all that noise.
Yes, and we have two key case studies that provide overwhelming, very detailed circumstantial evidence connecting this kind of organized negative campaigning directly to the ruling party's infrastructure.
Let's start with the first one.
The first example emerged almost unintentionally, really, during a judicial process. This was the court case against the former Interior Minister, Kowai Katsuyuki, and his wife. They were on trial for vote buying and other electoral law violations during the 2019 House of Councilors election.
And Kowai was a close ally of former Prime Minister Abe, if I remember correctly.
Very close. And the LDP headquarters had transferred an extraordinarily large sum of money, 120 million yen, to his local office right before the election.
But the most revealing details about the digital campaign didn't come from the bribery charges themselves. They came from testimony.
That's right. The testimony of an unnamed IT consultant who had been hired by Kowai. This consultant confessed, under oath, to orchestrating computational negative propaganda against the opposing candidate, a woman named Shiomura Ayaka.
What did he admit to doing, specifically?
The confession was specific and damning. The consultant was hired for a two-pronged attack. First, he admitted to manipulating search engine results about critical issues related to Kowai.
So, SEO. Pushing negative information about his own client down the search rankings.
Exactly. It's search engine optimization weaponized for political reputation management. But the more significant admission was that he had actively, and I quote, manufactured and published negative articles on a blog specifically to worsen the image of the opposing candidate.
So he admitted to fabricating content just to damage a political rival's reputation.
He did. And this manipulation wasn't just theoretical, it was hugely consequential. Kowai won that election by only 20,000 votes.
That is exactly the kind of narrow margin where a targeted, technologically amplified negative campaign of fake blog posts could make a decisive, outcome-altering difference.
It seems very likely that it did. The outcome of that election appears to have been swayed by professionally manufactured digital deception.
Yeah, the consultant's specific methods for amplifying those blog posts, whether he used bots or troll farms or other CP techniques, that wasn't fully detailed in the trial.
It wasn't. But the core fact remains. An LDP politician hired an IT consultant to actively manufacture and disseminate negative content against an opponent as a deliberate part of an election strategy. That is highly consequential, circumstantial evidence of sophisticated computational involvement at the state level.
So let's move to the second case study, which is arguably even more revealing of the internal infrastructure. This one centered on a Twitter account.
A highly influential one. The account was at DAPI 2019. This account was a massive political force online. It had 170,000 followers and was notorious for these persistent ideologically charged attacks on opposition CDP lawmakers.
And a lawsuit was filed to disclose the operator's identity.
Yes, and that lawsuit provided the crucial links that led back to the ruling establishment.
The DAPI account's profile itself was pretty upfront about its ideology, wasn't it? It seemed to align perfectly with the Neto Uyu movement.
It did. The bio read, loving Japan, hating the biased reporting of the mass media, following the live broadcasts of the parliament. It was a dedicated platform for pushing a hardline nationalist narrative.
And its operational habits reinforced that. It was constantly reposting videos from far-right programs, hosting historical revisionists, and posting these highly edited, biased, and often just false videos of parliamentary recordings to discredit opposition politicians.
The sheer volume and the consistency of it, well, it required a dedicated operation. This wasn't a hobbyist.
And here's where the structure exposed the whole game. The identity of the operator, which was revealed through the lawsuit, wasn't some lone wolf activist logging in from his basement.
No, it was an unnamed small-scale internet company, and this company had direct financial connections to the LDP.
How direct?
Subsequent investigation revealed that the company behind DAPI had received direct contracts from the LDP for services like website maintenance and document production, but the trail didn't even end there.
There was more.
The company also received large annual contracts from a firm called System Shun Center Company Limited.
Which investigative outlets like BuzzFeed News and Litera reported was effectively an LDP dummy company that specialized in financial services.
That's the crucial link, because top LDP officials, including the current Prime Minister, Kishida Fumio, had served on its board of directors in the early 2000s.
So the path of funding and coordination goes directly from this anonymous, abusive Twitter account through a contracted company back to the LDP's own financial and organizational infrastructure.
The connection is clear, and the temporal analysis of the DAPI account's activity provided the smoking gun that this was a professional salaried operation.
The smoking gun.
Almost all of the accounts, over 5,000 tweets, were posted during regular Japanese office hours, typically between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m., and rarely, if ever, on weekends.
So if DAPI was operated 9 to 5, what does that fundamentally change about how we view political activism in Japan?
It changes everything.
It means political computational warfare isn't spontaneous, it's industrialized. It's a paid service. It's formalized and outsourced by the political party infrastructure.
It transforms what looks like furious grassroots activism into a paid-for corporate service delivered by employees punching the clock.
And when this scandal broke just before a general election, the opposition directly challenged the prime minister in the Diet, right?
Yeah.
They demanded an assurance that no LDP members would engage in this kind of activity.
They did, and the response from the prime minister at the time was, well, it was highly evasive. He resorted to these generalized statements that all Diet members should follow electoral law,
rather than outright rejecting the use of contracted computational propaganda.
Exactly. And that failure to definitively reject the practice only added more weight to the already overwhelming circumstantial evidence that the LDP benefited from, and very possibly directed, this sophisticated ecosystem of digital deception.
So this strategic digital infrastructure, built on noise and corporate funding, it's the delivery system for a very specific ideological agenda, an agenda that relies on populist identity politics. And central to this agenda is the Neto Uyo movement.
It is, and it's important to distinguish these internet right-wingers from the traditional right-wing movements you might think of, the guys in the black trucks playing militaristic music on the streets.
This is a different beast.
A very different beast. Neto Uyo are primarily online users who are sympathetic to right-wing or nationalist views. They're characterized by a deep distrust of mainstream media and often a pronounced sexism and anti-feminism.
And ideologically, their core beliefs are centered on pushing for constitutional revision, right? Specifically allowing Japan to have a proper offensive military.
That's a central tenet, along with a pronounced anti-Korean and anti-Chinese racism and exclusivism. They function as this anonymous but highly mobilized online force.
What kind of numbers are we talking about?
Estimates suggest an active core of up to 100,000 dedicated users, but they're supported by a latent population of over 1 million passive followers who amplify their messages.
And the discursive marker, the rhetorical weapon that really defines their strategy and is migrated into the wider political discourse, is the term anti-Japanese.
The empty signifier anti-Japanese, or hanichi. It's a rhetorical weapon of incredible power.
An empty signifier. That's a really helpful way to put it.
Yeah.
Explain why that term is so strategically crucial to this populist movement.
Well, it originated in right-leaning magazines back in the late 1990s. It was used to denounce proponents of what they saw as a masochistic view of Japanese history, particularly concerning World War II and its legacy.
But once it migrated online, through image bulletin boards and social media, it became something else.
It became a generic insult. It's deployed to denounce anyone critical of the LDP or nationalist policy. Political opponents, critical historians, academics, left-leaning media outlets like the Asahi Shimbun.
The genius of the term is its binary simplicity. You're either with us or you're anti-Japanese. There's no middle ground.
Exactly. By using that term, politicians rhetorically legitimize their exclusive right to represent the people. Anyone who opposes them isn't just wrong on policy, they are a fundamental enemy of the national community itself, a traitor.
It just shuts down nuanced debate completely and creates that ideological rift you need for populist mobilization.
And this use of CP and populist binary rhetoric, it coincided with a consistent long-term strategy, particularly under former Prime Minister Abe, to put real institutional pressure on the free media.
Abe was a longtime, very vocal critic of what he called leftist journalism. He specifically targeted the public broadcaster NHK and the Asahi Shimbun.
He blamed them for his past political losses and for promoting what he called that masochistic view of Japanese history, which he felt undermined national pride.
And this wasn't just rhetorical criticism. This was a strategy of institutional capture and intimidation.
Absolutely. Abe installed conservatives onto NHK's board, and the new president of NHK, who notably lacked any broadcasting experience, famously asserted that the public broadcaster's role was to reflect government policy. He actually said, when the government is saying right, we cannot say left.
Which is a fundamental challenge to the entire concept of public service broadcasting independence.
And this pressure didn't just remain theoretical. It led to tangible consequences. In 2016, the then communications minister, Sanai Takaichi, openly threatened to close television stations that flouted rules on political impartiality.
And why was that threat so inflammatory?
It was inflammatory because it invoked the telecommunications business law, which gives the government the power to order a broadcaster off the air if it's deemed to have repeatedly violated political impartiality rules.
Oh, it's the nuclear option.
It is. And to openly threaten using that ultimate sanction at a time when several prominent liberal TV anchors who had been government critics were leaving their jobs, it was widely seen as a chilling exercise of power designed to foster self-censorship.
It was a signal. Criticize the administration and you'll face swift existential threats.
And the narrative control strategy evolved even further. The Abe government actively avoided open press conferences where unscripted critical questions might be asked.
Instead, they focused on influence, right? Dining frequently with media executives, expanding the global PR budget, and shunning liberal rivals while promoting favorable coverage through controlled access.
And on top of all that, we saw the enactment of systemic legal constraints during this period. Laws like the Protection of Specially Designated Secrets Law in 2014 and the Conspiracy Law in 2017.
Both of which were widely criticized for vaguely defining state secrets and potentially restricting the flow of information to reporters.
That's right. So while the Japanese media remains robust, critics warn that this combination of digital amplification, institutional intimidation, and new legal restrictions is fostering a deep self-censorship and a decline in media independence.
So this entire strategic shift, the online warfare, the media suppression, the rise of hardline identity politics, it all seems to have culminated in the historic political realignment brought about by the rise of Sanai Takaichi, who became Japan's first female prime minister in October of 2025.
The context for that realignment is crucial. The LDP's longtime coalition partner, Komeito, chose to leave the government after Takaichi replaced Shigeru Ishiba as the LDP president.
And Komeito is the political arm of the lay Buddhist Soka Gakkai organization. They've traditionally acted as a kind of moderate check on the LDP, especially on hawkish security policy and constitutional revision.
Exactly. Their refusal to support Takaichi signaled that her administration's hardline agenda was just unacceptable to the more centrist wing of that governing alliance.
Which created a political vacuum and forced Takaichi's LDP to look for a new majority.
And they secured it by forming a coalition agreement with Nippon Ishin no Kai, the Japan Innovation Party. They agreed to provide confidence and supply, formalizing a whole new government structure. Ishin members didn't serve in the cabinet, but their parliamentary support was absolutely essential.
So who are Nippon Ishin no Kai? What's their ideology?
They're generally described as a center-right to right-wing populist party. Their ideology is a bit of a blend, strongly advocating for libertarianism, neoliberalism, and conservatism. They promote radical decentralization, federalism, and limited government.
They're often seen as an urban populist force, right?
Yeah.
They had a major breakthrough in the 2021 general election, largely by attacking the LDP's own entrenched bureaucracy.
That's their brand. So this agreement brings a major populist force, one that's often defined by its opposition to the LDP establishment, into a working relationship with the LDP's most conservative nationalist wing under Takaichi.
Which signals a profound mainstreaming of these hardline populist priorities that Komeito used to moderate and keep in check.
It does, and the resulting coalition agreement immediately prioritized a set of policies that reflect both this kind of economic populism aimed at voter anxieties and a hardline constitutional conservatism.
No.
These are not incremental changes, they are structural shifts.
Okay, so on the economic front, what was the focus?
The focus was on urgent anti-inflation measures designed to provide immediate relief. They pledged to abolish the temporary gasoline tax rate, a direct, visible benefit to consumers. They also considered temporarily exempting staple food items from the consumption tax for 2 years.
These are classic populist moves, quick, visible benefits that tap directly into real economic anxiety.
Absolutely. And furthermore, they agreed to introduce a new Government Efficiency Bureau to review excessive government spending and subsidies.
Which is a clear nod to Ishin's libertarian desire to streamline the bureaucracy and attack what they characterize as government waste.
And in doing so, creating these pseudo-enemies among civil servants and recipients of subsidies.
And constitutionally, the agenda is, well, it's highly ambitious. It moves way beyond the cautious incrementalism of past LDP administrations.
It does. The agreement prioritizes establishing a joint drafting committee on Article 9 revision. That is a monumental step toward changing Japan's post-war self-defense constraints.
On top of that, they plan to establish a joint drafting committee on emergency clauses and executive powers, with a bill ready for 2026.
Which signals an intent to normalize Japan as a security actor that's capable of centralized, decisive action during a national crisis. It formalizes emergency powers that many critics worry could be misused.
In terms of cultural and identity policies, the coalition is just as focused on hardline conservatism.
Very much so. They are prioritizing maintaining the current order of imperial succession based on unbroken male line succession, and revising the imperial house law to allow the adoption of male descendants from former imperial branches.
This is a highly sensitive topic touching the very core of Japanese national identity.
It is. And by focusing on preserving the male line succession, they're prioritizing tradition and national identity over gender equality, which aligns perfectly with the deeply conservative cultural priorities of the LDP's nationalist wing and the Nedo Uyu movement.
They also pledged to enact a national emblem protection law and maintain the shared surname principle, while also legalizing the use of maiden names. It's a careful, almost performative balance.
It is, maintaining the cultural status quo with the shared surname, while offering a slight concession to modern reality by legalizing maiden name use.
And finally, defense and security. The commitments here align very strongly with Takaichi's long-standing hawkish views.
The coalition agreed to accelerate the defense buildup, aligning with her campaign pledge to raise defense spending to 2% of GDP by 2025-26. This is a massive shift. It effectively repeals the former 1% GDP cap that had governed Japan's defense policy for decades.
So Takaichi's administration, it's being characterized analytically as this paradigmatic shift toward proactive governance and strategic conservatism, a belief that the state must be an active agent of revitalization.
And our slogan really captured that. It focused on turning people's anxieties into hope and action.
We can see this proactive approach really clearly in our energy policy.
Yes. She openly called for a rapid revival of nuclear power. And this isn't just about electricity. It's framed as an issue of national security and economic sovereignty.
Right, aiming to reduce hydrocarbon imports and ease inflationary pressure.
And this policy was validated, in a sense, when public support for nuclear energy reached a majority, 54%, in late 2025. That was the first time since the 2011 Fukushima disaster.
And her immigration policy seems to reflect that same blend of pragmatism and cultural preservation.
It does. Despite Japan's massive labor shortages, her approach emphasizes tightening immigration rules, establishing quantitative and sector-specific quotas, and focusing heavily on cultural and institutional integration.
So this stance indicates that future policy is going to prioritize managing social stability and national identity over embracing large-scale general labor inflow.
It's a hardline selective approach. It seeks to preserve social cohesion, a core populist theme, even if it means potentially slowing the economic growth necessary to address the labor crisis. And on foreign policy, Takaichi's security strategy is framed as this distinct move from cautious pacifism to controlled assertiveness.
This strategy emphasizes strengthening intelligence capacity, creating a new strategic intelligence agency, and developing counterstrike capabilities. This is all about restoring Japan's agency as a full participant in global security, not just a state that relies on the U.S. alliance.
Her approach to regional dynamics follows this pragmatic 3D formula: deterrence, dialogue, and diversification.
And Takaichi declared that Japan must become a full-fledged actor in global security. Critically, this vision led her to claim that an emergency in the Taiwan area could constitute a survival-threatening situation for Japan,
Which would allow the country to exercise its right to collective self-defense. That's a huge departure from the cautious ambiguity of previous administrations.
It's a massive shift, and this strategic assertion is reflected in broader diplomacy. Japan is simultaneously deepening ties with India, Australia, and Vietnam, seeking to be an initiator of economic and technological coalitions, not just a participant. And in Central Asia, Japan's engagement is shifting from that traditional soft power diplomacy toward a more strategic, multi-dimensional policy.
Combining cultural, economic, and emerging security components, they're aiming to offer an alternative model grounded in technology transfer and human capital development. This is the very definition of proactive governance.
This brings us to the theoretical conclusion of this deep dive. How does this systemic use of computational propaganda and the rise of this hardline policy agenda affect the foundational stability of the Japanese system, and perhaps global stability?
And this is where it gets really interesting. It connects the digital manipulation and the populist policy agenda to the foundational stability of the democratic system itself. Political science theory suggests that the foundation of post-war stability among advanced nations, what we call the democratic peace, is actually insufficient to explain modern reality.
So we need a conceptual shift here.
We do. The core argument moves from relying on just the formal features of a democracy, like holding regular elections, that's the classic minimalist measure of the democratic peace, to relying on institutional substance. And that is what defines the liberal peace.
Okay, so the democratic peace theory basically says, if you have a ballot box, you won't fight other countries with ballot boxes. But the liberal peace theory says, it's not just the front door, the ballot box that matters. It's the plumbing and the wiring behind the walls, the strong institutions that constrain the leadership. Am I tracking that analogy correctly?
That is a perfect analogy. The conceptual problem with the traditional theory is that it relies too heavily on these minimal institutional features, and it ignores key liberal checks and balances.
And this is why we have to talk about illiberal democracies.
Exactly. States where elections exist, they're held regularly. But the rule of law, media freedom, and judicial independence are being systematically suppressed or hollowed out.
And what does the empirical evidence suggest about these illiberal democracies on the international stage?
The evidence suggests that these illiberal democracies are often prone to external aggression or unpredictable policy shifts, while true, mature liberal democracies maintain peace among themselves. The constraint is clear. Liberal institutions impose prohibitively high political costs on leaders who are contemplating aggressive wars.
And why are those costs so high? Is it because of the plumbing, the institutional checks?
It is. In a liberal system, you have robust legislative oversight that can delay or block funding for military adventures. You have a critical, free public media that fuels negative public opinion against unnecessary conflicts. You have judicial scrutiny.
So that structure forces liberal democratic states to prefer institutional cooperation and diplomacy, because the political price of an aggressive war is almost certainly failure or political overthrow at home.
And those robust constraints do not fully exist in electoral democracies that lack that liberal foundation.
But this leads us to the conceptual framework that explains this stability, which is called the liberal symmetry theory.
Right. This theory posits that the peace we've observed since World War II is fundamentally a limited peace. It exists only among advanced states. It's a kind of exclusive club.
What defines an advanced state in this context?
These are states that possess high state capacity, mature market economies, and deep integration into global supply chains.
So the peace isn't some universal constant of democracy. It's a fragile outcome of membership in this liberal club where mutual economic and institutional interests are so intertwined that war becomes structurally suppressed.
Precisely. The theory also introduces the concept of war selection bias.
War selection bias.
Because liberal democratic states face those high domestic political costs from protracted, costly conflicts measured in casualties, budget burdens, political approval ratings, they institutionally select only winnable wars.
That is fascinating. So the political system itself acts like a built-in risk assessment filter, and it only lets through the easy conflicts.
Essentially, yes. The prerequisite for selecting a winnable war is a significant power asymmetry against your opponent. The institutional constraints demand the assumption of a short-term, decisive conflict.
But if power is roughly equal, a power symmetry, a protracted conflict is unavoidable, which raises the political cost too high to justify the war in the first place.
Exactly. Therefore, the liberal structure compels states to only initiate war against opponents over whom they possess an overwhelming advantage.
And the stability of peace, among these liberal states is guaranteed because they maintain three crucial layers of symmetry that make war selection impossible against each other. So the first one is normative symmetry. What does that entail?
Normative symmetry means there's a mutual recognition of legitimate values. They trust each other's commitment to dialogue, to the rule of law, and to a shared understanding of political procedures. They believe the other side will play by generally accepted rules.
Okay, and second is institutional symmetry.
This refers to similar political incentive structures and constraints. Leaders know that the other leader is also constrained by an independent legislature and public opinion. This makes their foreign policy transparent, predictable, and reliable. There are no sudden, unpredictable moves because the domestic institutions prevent them.
And third, power symmetry.
Which is where mutual deterrence prevents the selection of a winnable war against a peer. The existence of equal or comparable power makes any conflict far too politically costly internally.
So the risk of breakdown occurs when one of these major advanced states, like Japan, transitions toward illiberal democracy. If the computational propaganda, the manufactured outrage, the media suppression we've been discussing, if all that succeeds in eroding the liberal substance,
things like media freedom, judicial independence, nuanced political debate,
then the institutional and normative symmetries are broken.
Exactly. The populist trend of disregarding democratic procedures, of fabricating external enemies like the continuous use of that anti-Japanese signifier and channeling rage through these controlled platforms, it fundamentally undermines the liberal foundation that constrains aggression and fosters mutual trust.
So if the Japanese political system becomes less predictable internally, it risks disrupting the entire concept of institutional symmetry with its partners.
It does, which brings us to the final point. What does all this mean?
It means the entire discussion of DAPI, the Kowai case, the media threats, and the rise of the Takechi-Ishin alliance. It isn't just about domestic Japanese politics or who wins the next election. It has real international security implications tied to global stability theory.
The strategic manipulation of public opinion, the use of targeted defamation against political opposition, and the suppression of critical media. All of this directly undermines the institutional symmetry that's necessary for a stable, predictable democracy. When those constraints are weak, the state's character changes.
And the increasing reliance on this binary emotional rhetoric, the anger, the dislike, the accusations of treason, it signals a hollowing out of that liberal substance. So if the domestic institutional constraints weaken, the internal political costs for leaders to pursue aggressive actions or sharp policy deviations, they decrease significantly.
Which makes the political system inherently less predictable for its international partners, especially as the government pursues these hardline policies like rapid defense buildup and constitutional revision. The erosion of liberal constraints at home changes the character of the state abroad.
So the fusion of aggressive online tactics with this strategic conservative policy agenda demonstrates a clear move toward mobilizing manufactured public opinion for structural change.
We've analyzed a political shift that's defined not just by what policies are being pursued, but by the increasing efficiency with which dissent is drowned out and the political landscape is hardened into these rigid ideological camps. The illusion of spontaneous grassroots fury, facilitated by technology and algorithmic bias, is the engine of this new political reality.
We've seen how technological manipulation creates the illusion of spontaneous grassroots fury, how the party in power developed a sophisticated infrastructure to benefit from algorithmic bias, and how the erosion of liberal institutions can transform political engagement from constructive debate into a binary, high-stakes conflict. This shift from a focus on the ballot box alone to a focus on the robustness of those liberal constraints reminds us that stability isn't guaranteed by the simple presence of elections, but by the dedicated daily health of the institutions that constrain those who win power.